Tonight, we begin with a quiet story, one that moves gently through Liverpool streets, through small clubs, through long train rides, and through one band's rise from ordinary beginnings to extraordinary fame. It is the story of the Beatles, four young men who loved music, who played in small rooms, who practiced for hours, who dreamed of something bigger, and who became one of the most beloved bands in the history of the world. There's no need to hurry through this story. Let it unfold slowly, like the soft opening notes of a favorite song. As you listen, imagine a rainy street in Liverpool, a small guitar case in hand, a young musician walking toward a stage with hope and with a dream. Tonight, we follow their journey. From the quiet beginnings of childhood to a life of music that still fills the world today. The Beatles began in Liverpool, England, a city of docks, ships, and busy streets. It was a place full of movement, full of working people, and full of music waiting to happen. John Lennon was born in 1940, Paul McCartney in 1942, George Harrison in 1943. Ringo Starr in 1940 as well, though he joined the group a little later. They grew up in ordinary homes, not rich homes, not famous homes, just homes where life was lived, one day at a time, with small routines and simple hopes. John was a boy with a sharp mind and a strong personality. He loved drawing, joking, and making people laugh, even when he could be mischievous. Paul was gentle, musical, and full of ideas. George was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply interested in the guitar. Ringo, whose real name was Richard Starkey, was cheerful, patient, and full of rhythm. As children, none of them knew they would one day change the world. They were simply boys who noticed music. Music on the radio, music in the streets, music in their hearts. In those years after the war, music carried hope. It carried energy. It carried the feeling that life could become brighter. And these four boys were listening. John first formed a skiffle group called the Quarrymen. It was a simple beginning, small performances, rough sounds. Young musicians are trying to figure out how to play together. Then Paul joined, and later George. The chemistry began to grow. They practiced, they listened, they tried again. They learned how to turn noise into music and music into feeling. There is something peaceful about beginnings like that. Not sudden success, but patient practice. Not instant fame, but quiet repetition. A garage, a local hall, a schoolroom, a small stage, a few listeners, and every time they played, they became a little better. They spent long evenings learning songs from America, from rhythm and blues, from rock and roll, from all the sounds that made their imaginations wake up. They were not trying to be polished at first. They were trying to be real, and slowly their sound began to take shape. Not just one voice, but several. Not just one style, but many. A mix of energy, charm, harmony, and something that felt new. In the quiet of those early nights, when the clubs were small and the crowds were thin, the future of music was already being written. Before the world knew their name, the Beatles spent long nights performing in Hamburg, Germany. This was not glamorous. The rooms were loud, the hours were long, the work was exhausting. They played for hours on end, sometimes tired, sometimes hungry, sometimes uncertain, but they kept going. That time in Hamburg taught them how to become a real band. It gave them strength, it gave them discipline, it gave them hours and hours of practice that no classroom could ever teach. There is a quiet kind of beauty in hard work like that, the kind that builds skills slowly, the kind that turns rough beginnings into something polished and strong. Every night they played. They learned a little more, how to hold an audience, how to stay on time, how to bring a song to life. And all the while they were growing not just as musicians, but as people. They were learning to trust. They were learning teamwork. They were learning what it meant to share a dream. John, Paul, George, and later Ringo. Each brought something different. Each mattered. Each helped shape the sound that would soon travel far beyond Liverpool. In the dim light of small clubs and late nights, something remarkable was forming. Back home in Liverpool, the band continued to grow. Their manager, Brian Epstein, saw something special in them. He believed in their potential. He helped guide them. He helped them look and sound like the group that the world would one day know. And then came the recording sessions, the first songs, the first albums, the first moments when people began to listen closely. A new kind of excitement began to spread. Their music was fresh, their harmonies were clear, their songs were catchy, emotional, and full of life. People found themselves humming along, then singing along, then waiting for the next song. It did not happen all at once. Success often arrives like dawn, slowly at first, then brighter, then impossible to ignore. The Beatles appeared on television. They played on the radio. Their music traveled across cities, across countries, across oceans. Then came Beatlemania. Crowds screamed. People cried. Teenagers rushed to see them. Their faces appeared in magazines. Their hair, their style, their voices, their smiles, all became part of the moment. Yet beneath the noise, the music remained the heart of everything. And the music kept growing. Love songs, joyful songs, songs about longing, about youth, about hope, songs that felt simple on the surface but rich underneath. They were not only performers, they were songwriters, creators, dreamers, and the world was listening. Of course, fame was not always easy. The crowds were huge, the schedules were relentless, the pressure was constant. Everywhere they went, people wanted more songs, more appearances, more of their energy, more of their time. It could be overwhelming. Even joyful things can become heavy when they never stop. The Beatles had to find ways to keep going. They traveled, they recorded, they performed, they answered questions. They tried to stay themselves in the middle of all the attention, and slowly their music began to change. They became more experimental, more creative, more willing to take risks. They explored new sounds, new instruments, new ideas. This was part of what made them so special. They did not stay trapped in one style. They kept growing, they kept listening, they kept trusting their own curiosity. There is a quiet strength in that kind of change. It means not just repeating what works, but daring to move forward. The Beatles were never only one thing, they were always becoming. And in that becoming, they gave the world something lasting. In the middle years, the Beatles created music that changed everything. Albums like Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the White Album showed a band willing to push beyond expectations. Their songs became more layered, more thoughtful, more imaginative. They were not just making hits, they were making art. The studio became a place of exploration, a place where sound could be tested, shaped, stretched, and transformed. A place where a simple melody could become something deeply moving. You can imagine the calm of those sessions, not always calm in the practical sense, of course, but calm in the way true focus feels. A microphone, a guitar, a piano, a tape machine, a voice finding the right note, a rhythm settling into place. And somewhere in that process, magic happened. John Lennon brought sharpness and honesty. Paul McCartney brought melody and warmth. George Harrison brought quiet depth and growing spirituality. Ringo Starr brought a steady rhythm and gentle personality. Together, they made something greater than the sum of their parts, something that could not have come from any one of them alone. Their songs became part of the world's memory, not just music to hear, but music to carry, music to return to, music to rest inside. And even now, years later, those songs still feel alive. As time went on, the group began to drift in different directions. Each member grew in his own way. Each followed his own interests and creative path. The bond remained, but the shape of the band changed. This is often how great stories go, not in a sudden ending, but in a natural unfolding. The years ask for different things. The people change. The work changes. And eventually, the chapter closes. The Beatles eventually stopped performing together, but the music remained. The records remained. The influence remained. John explored new ideas. Paul continued to write and perform. George followed his own spiritual and musical path. Ringo kept making music and sharing his easy warmth with the world. Even apart, they each carried something of what the Beatles had been, and the world carried it too. That is part of what makes their story so peaceful to reflect on. It is not only a story of fame, it is a story of growth, of friendship, of creativity. In the way ordinary young men became part of something unforgettable. Their music kept spreading across generations, across countries, across time, and it still does. The story of the Beatles is a story of music, but also of hope. They began as boys in Liverpool, playing in small rooms, and became one of the most influential bands the world has ever known. Their journey reminds us that great things often start quietly, with practice, with friendship, with repetition, with a little courage. They did not know in those early days what they would become. They only knew that they loved music, and they kept following that love, one song at a time. That is a beautiful lesson. It tells us that creativity can grow from small beginnings, that teamwork can create something lasting, that imagination can carry ordinary lives into extraordinary places. The Beatles changed music forever, but they also changed how people felt about music. They made it possible to dream bigger, to listen more closely, to believe that sound could be more than entertainment. It could be a connection, memory, joy, comfort. And as the night grows quiet, we can remember their story as one of light, sound, and possibility. A story of four young men who followed their music into history. And a story that still plays softly somewhere in the background of the world, helping us remember that even the smallest beginnings can lead to something timeless.